The homeowners association tried to steal my farm. They forgot who controls their water supply. When I found out that the association had secretly sold 1,700 acres of my family's land, I knew I had to fight. But instead of simply going to court, I decided to remind them of a crucial detail. I control their water supply. The association's first move came early in the morning. The weather was perfect for planting. Clear sky, light breeze. I was already on my tractor before the sun rose, as my grandfather had taught me. That's when my phone started vibrating non-stop. When I finally looked at the messages, I almost choked on my sandwich. 10 missed calls from neighbors, 3 voicemails from my cousin, and an email from the association with a violation notice. I opened the email. They claimed that the noise from my tractor violated the community's right to peace and that my chicken coops caused an offensive odor, which devalued the local properties. They gave me 48 hours to halt all agricultural operations or face a $200 daily fine. I laughed out loud. They had no authority over my land. But the next day, the association president showed up in person. I was greeted by the sound of a car door slamming. A woman in an immaculate white suit marched up to my yard, clipboard in hand, accompanied by 2 members of the association's board. "Miss Walker," she called. "I'm Deborah Williams, president of the Deck-Rid Stats Association. We need to talk about your violations." I crossed my arms. "There's nothing to discuss. Your association has no jurisdiction over my land." Deborah smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, according to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land is now subject to the association's rules." That took me by surprise. My property tax bill hadn't changed at all. My family had been farming that land for over 100 years. No association could just decide it now had control over it. Her smile turned cold. "Times change, Miss Walker. We have new standards now." She handed me a cease and desist order and left, but I wasn't going to back down that easily. Something was off. I called my cousin Tom, who lived in the community and was on the city council. "They've been planning this for months," he warned. "Deborah's been having secret meetings with contractors. She's even changing the minutes of the meetings after they're approved." That night, I started digging into the county records. That's when I uncovered the scam. My agricultural exemption was still valid for another 5 years. Deborah had lied. I ignored the association's letters and fines for an entire week, but then they started bothering the police with noise complaints. "Mike, look," said Sheriff Davis, an old friend from school. "I know this is ridiculous, but they're filing complaints every single day. They even started a petition to classify your farm as a public nuisance." "Dave," I said, "my family's been feeding this county for generations. What's really going on?" He hesitated. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but the association's pushing for a massive real estate project, and your land's part of it." That's when I saw them. Men in suits walking through my fields, taking photos and making measurements. I jumped in the truck and drove straight toward them. "Can I help?" I shouted. "You're trespassing on private property." A tall man in an expensive suit turned to face me. "I'm James Miller from VVAL Development Corporation. We're doing surveys for planning." I furrowed my brow. "Planning for what? This is my farm." Miller looked confused. "According to our documents, we bought 1,700 acres from the Deck-Rid Stats Association 3 weeks ago. Construction starts next month." My heart stopped. "That's impossible. I never sold my land." He showed me official documents, maps stamped by the county, and a signature identical to mine. But I never signed anything. I rushed home and pulled the original documents from the safe. Everything seemed normal, but something was wrong. I called the registry office. "Sir, there is a property transfer record made 6 weeks ago," said the attendant. "According to our records, 1,700 acres were transferred to the Deck-Rid Stats Community Trust. Now you only have 300 acres. My hands trembled. "This is impossible. I never signed that transfer." "Sir, the documents have your signature. Would you like me to send copies by email? When I opened the file, I stared at my own forged signature. That's when I saw her. Deborah, sitting in her luxury SUV, parked at the edge of my property, watching everything. When our eyes met, she smiled and waved. I had less than a month before the bulldozers arrived. Then, I remembered a very important detail. Who controls their water supply? The water play. My grandfather had signed an agreement in 1943 allowing the county to build a reservoir on our land. At the time, it seemed like a good deal. The government needed a reservoir to supply the neighboring communities, and my grandfather, a practical man, saw it as an opportunity. In exchange, he ensured that our family would have total control over the distribution of the water from the reservoir. Not a drop could be diverted without our authorization, and any changes would depend on our signature. This detail went unnoticed by Deborah and the real estate speculators when they forged my signature and stole my land. I tried to fight back. I went to court, gathered evidence, but the game was already rigged against me. My lawyer said the process could take years, and even with all the evidence of forgery, I faced a tough battle against billion-dollar companies and corrupt politicians. In the end, everything got bogged down in bureaucracy, and before I could ask, the contractors had already started preparing the land for construction. I had no choice. I lost my farm. The machines came, knocked down the sheds, tore down the fences, leveled the fields where my family had farmed for generations. The place where I grew up, where I learned to drive a tractor with my grandfather, turned into a massive construction site, filled with cement trucks and cranes. I watched it all without reacting. I didn't protest, didn't throw myself in front of the bulldozers, didn't make fiery speeches against the greed of the speculators. I just waited for years. The project moved forward. The land that was once used to feed the region became one of the largest real estate developments in the state. High-end condominiums, shopping malls, office buildings, planned parks. They wanted to turn my family's old farm into an urban paradise, a symbol of luxury and modernity. Investors poured millions into the project. Politicians went on TV to talk about the new city within the city. The real estate market went wild. Construction companies raced to build massive buildings, residential towers that promised a high-end lifestyle for future buyers. And I kept waiting. Every building that went up, every new paved street, every artificial structure. All of it strengthened my plan. The speculators, the politicians, the contractors. They were all confident they had won, they had kicked me out, they had built on my past. But there was one thing nobody noticed. They built depending on my water. All those thousands of new homes, luxury condominiums, office buildings, restaurants, shopping malls, clubs. Everything depended on the reservoir built on my old farm, and that reservoir still belonged to me. The agreement signed by my grandfather was never canceled. When they stole my land, they only stole the soil, but not the rights to the water. And none of these construction companies bothered to check that detail. The new buyers were excited. The pre-sales of the units began. Real estate agents showcased shiny models, showing a perfect, modern, sustainable city. TV ads said it would be the new hub of urban innovation, a place where families could thrive. And that's when I made my move. The city was almost ready, but the houses hadn't been sold yet. No residents had moved in, no investors had gotten their money back. They were closing the first million-dollar deals, but they didn't know they were sitting on a house of cards. In the dead of night, with all the paperwork signed and the developments ready to open their doors, I sent my official notice. The next day, the newspapers reported what seemed like an absolute disaster: mega development in crisis. Water supply compromised. Billion-dollar real estate project is illegally dependent on a private water source. Investors warn, without agreement, new neighborhood could become a ghost town. In the construction company's offices, chaos erupted. Phones were ringing off the hook, lawyers rushed to understand what the hell had happened, and executives broke into cold sweats as they watched thousands of buyers canceling contracts. And then, as expected, they called me for a meeting. This time, it wasn't just Deborah. They were all there, the directors of the construction companies, lawyers, investors, even the mayor. Everyone sitting at the table, staring at me as if I were the devil incarnate. A well-dressed man cleared his throat and tried to remain calm. We can resolve this amicably. How much do you want to release the supply? I crossed my arms. I don't want money. The look of relief some tried to muster died instantly. Then what do you want? The other one asked, slowly smiling, letting them sweat a little before I answered. I want everything back. Deborah, who had been sitting in the corner of the room, lost control. This is impossible. You're bluffing. The government can't allow a project of this magnitude to be cancelled by one man. I tilted my head. Then try. But remember, you have beautiful buildings, homes, and condominiums, just without a drop of water. They were desperate. They couldn't force me to sign anything because I wasn't breaking any laws. It was their own incompetence that had put them in this position. The meeting ended without agreement, but I already knew I had won. In the following days, the newspapers kept exposing the situation. Investors pulled their money out. The construction companies began to feel the weight of their debts. Lawyers tried to find a legal way out, but there was nothing they could do without playing into my game. Now it was just a matter of waiting a little longer. I knew that soon, they'd crawl back to me with an offer they wouldn't have any choice but to accept. And then, finally, I'd take back what was mine. I was sitting at the head of the conference table, watching the tense faces of the executives, lawyers, and investors. They were desperate. Some drummed their fingers on the table, others fiddled with their phones, probably searching for some miraculous way out of the problem. But they all knew the truth. There was no solution without my approval. The silence stretched for long seconds before one of the well-dressed men decided to speak. We can resolve this amicably. What would your demand be to release the supply? I took a deep breath, feeling the taste of victory about to come to fruition. I want everything back. My farm, my land, every inch you stole. I want everything in my name again. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs and whispers spread across the room. Some looked at each other, others seemed incredulous. Then Deborah, who had been silent until that moment, exploded. This is impossible. You lost that land legally. It was bought and sold according to the rules. You'll never get it back. I crossed my arms, staring directly at her. Legally. You really want to use that word? Because, as I recall, my signature was forged. Silence returned, but this time it was heavy with tension. No one could deny what I was saying. Before anyone could respond, my lawyer, a man with gray hair and sharp eyes, cleared his throat and leaned forward. Mike, I need to talk to you privately now. I raised an eyebrow, irritated that I was being interrupted at the moment when I had control of the situation, but I nodded, and we stepped out of the room to a more private corner. As soon as the door closed, he looked at me seriously. You're making a mistake. If you insist on taking that land back, you'll lose everything. My anger exploded instantly. What? How can you say that? You know that land is mine. We have the proof. He sighed, crossing his arms. Yes, we have proof, but that doesn't mean the legal battle will be easy. These companies have the best lawyers in the country, political influence, and they'll drag this case on for decades if necessary. Even if we manage to prove the fraud, the reacquisition of this land can be blocked by endless disputes. I felt my fists clench. I wanted to punch the wall. I had waited years for this moment. I wasn't going to let it slip away. So, what do you suggest? He looked at me for a moment, then smiled sideways. Instead of wanting to take everything back, you charge them to let them stay. I furrowed my brow. What are you talking about? Now you have something you've never had before, Mike. Visibility. The public is watching this case. Investors are nervous, and politicians are sweating bullets. For the first time, you have real power. Use it. I stared at him, still not fully understanding. He took a deep breath and explained. Officially prove that your signature was forged. Make it an undeniable legal fact. If you do that, no one will be able to deny that this land is yours. But instead of trying to take everything back by force, turn this property into an investment. These companies have already poured billions into this place and can't just abandon the buildings. If you charge a lifetime rent for them to continue using the land that truly belongs to you, you'll be securing an endless fortune. You don't need the land. You just need to ensure they'll always have to pay to use it. I stared at him, a mix of fury and fascination in my eyes. You want me to rent my own land to the same people who stole it from me? He smiled. I want you to become a multi-millionaire without lifting a finger. And if you do that, they'll never need to steal anything from you again. The thought unsettled me. Part of me wanted revenge, wanted that place to burn, wanted those companies to fail, wanted Deborah and the speculators to lose everything. But another part knew my lawyer was right. If I demanded the land back, they'd fight until the end. But if I forced them to pay for the right to stay, they'd have no choice but to give in. In the end, which revenge would be more satisfying? I returned to the meeting room, still reflecting on it. All eyes were on me, waiting for my decision. I took a deep breath and sat down, staring at each one of them. Before anything else, I want you to know that I've already proven my signature was forged. And if I take this to a judge now, lawsuits against you will drag on for years and destroy everything you've built. I saw their expressions harden, but I'm not an irrational man. I know many families have invested here. I know billions have been poured into these buildings. So, I have a proposal. I laced my fingers on the table and smiled. I don't want your companies. I don't want your buildings. I want my name on the deed to this land. And I want a lifetime lease contract. Every square meter of this place will officially be mine, and you will pay to continue using what you stole every month, without exception, forever. There was a collective shock. One of the older investors slammed his hand on the table. This is outright robbery. I tilted my head. Oh, so now you care about robbery. Funny. Another lawyer tried to negotiate. We can't agree to a lifetime lease. We can pay a one-time settlement and resolve this once and for all. I shook my head. I'm not asking. I'm informing you. If you refuse, tomorrow the lawsuit will be in court, and the entire project will be deemed illegal. You all lose. Silence. Deborah was pale. She knew I had won. The lawyers whispered among themselves. The investors checked their phones, sending frantic messages. I just waited, knowing they were cornered. Finally, one of the directors took a deep breath and spoke. We need a deadline to discuss internally. I shrugged. You have 24 hours. I stood up and left the room, feeling the weight of victory on me. The game wasn't over yet, but I knew I had backed them into a corner. They could argue among themselves, try to find alternatives, but in the end, they knew they had no way out. And when they returned with an answer, I'd be waiting, ready to ensure they paid for the rest of their lives for what they had done. But one thing still bothered me. Deborah. She had been too quiet, and I knew someone like her didn't give up so easily. The following days were a test of patience. I knew they were desperate, but I also knew they'd try anything to escape the trap they had fallen into. They had to maintain appearances, pretend they still had some advantage, some trump card. But it was obvious to everyone that time was against them. While I waited for the final response, exploring the scandal, newspapers, TV channels, and investigative blogs covered every detail. From the forgery of my signature to the corrupt maneuvers that allowed my land to be taken. Experts debated whether the project could survive this disaster, while economists warned that the financial collapse of the venture was imminent if an immediate solution wasn't found. Then, after 24 hours of closed-door meetings, I received the call I had been waiting for. We accept the terms, said one of the lawyers from the investor group. His voice was tense, as if every word was costing him a piece of his dignity. Great, I replied calmly. We can sign the contracts tomorrow. The next day, I walked into the conference room of one of the city's most luxurious offices. Everyone was there. Executives from major companies, renowned lawyers, investors with stern faces, and of course, Deborah. She was pale, her eyes filled with hatred. She knew I had won, but she still couldn't accept it. The documents were already prepared. I reviewed them with my lawyer. It was all there. The lifetime lease agreement, the official acknowledgement that the land was mine, and the terms for the water supply. Just one detail, I said while reading the final clauses. You'll also pay for the water you use. A silence took over the room. One of the lawyers furrowed his brow. But you're already charging rent for the land. Isn't that enough? I smiled. closing the folder with the documents. You knew full well that this place depends on the reservoir water. My grandfather signed a contract that gives my family full control over the use of water. If you want to stay here, you'll have to pay for it too. The discomfort was visible. They couldn't refuse. They had no other option. Deborah, with gritted teeth, clenched her fists on the table. "You're extorting us." I tilted my head, amused. "I'm not charging for what's mine. The same thing you tried to do to me, but without needing to forge documents." They knew they had lost. The agreement was signed right there, and before leaving, I shook hands with a few investors who, despite their resentment, tried to maintain composure. Deborah, however, didn't look me in the eye once. The next day, the water supply was restored, now under contract. Every drop that entered the pipes of that place generated immense profits for me. The venture was saved, and the buyers returned to invest. With that, my income skyrocketed. The first few months were just the beginning. My name was on every contract, every transaction involving the land went through me. The companies that settled there couldn't operate without paying rent, and the water supply became like an eternal toll, a tribute that ensured millions flowed into my account every month. And then, finally, came the moment to prove the signature forgery. With the scandal still fresh in the public's mind, it wasn't difficult to bring the case to court. We had all the evidence: comparative documents, forensic analysis of the signatures, testimonies from registry office employees who confirmed they had never seen me sign those papers. The judge wasted no time issuing the verdict. The signature was false, and the land transfer had been illegal. This should mean that I could fully reclaim the land, kick everyone out if I wanted to, but at that point, it wasn't worth it. I was already making more money than anyone there could imagine. Every month, millions flowed into my account without me needing to do a single thing. If I took the land back, I'd have to manage all of that, rebuild the infrastructure, face new legal challenges. But as it was, I owned the land where all of that was built, and they had no choice but to keep paying me. So, instead of kicking them out, I made the rent even more expensive. The court decision gave me even more leverage in negotiations. Now that the official recognition was guaranteed, I could renegotiate the contracts as I pleased. Some companies tried to protest, claiming that the original agreement was abusive. My lawyer simply responded with a smile. "If you don't want to pay, you can demolish everything and leave." No one left. Now, I was a millionaire without lifting a finger, but I didn't stop there. With the absurd profits I was accumulating, I began diversifying my investments. I bought land in other regions, entered the real estate sector, and financed modern agricultural projects. I went from a farmer who had lost everything to a giant in the real estate and infrastructure sector. The irony: the same investors who had once laughed at me were now trying to negotiate with me to enter new businesses. And as for Deborah, she fell from grace with the forgery scandal. Her name was dragged through the mud. They discovered she had forged not only my signature but also altered meeting minutes to approve projects without public consultation. She was sued, lost influence, and the investors discarded her without hesitation. But I knew she wouldn't give up that easily, and I was right. Even after losing everything, even after being expelled from the ventures board, she still tried to get back in the game. I learned, through some connections, that she was trying to gather a new group of investors to overturn my contracts. I knew she would try some dirty move, maybe even a new legal trick to escape the perpetual payments. But now, I was ready for anything. This time, she was the one on the defensive, and I couldn't wait to see what her next move would be. It was years of battle. The day I signed that lifetime lease agreement was the beginning of my empire, but the war was far from over. What happened next was a game of patience, a silent confrontation where, for the first time, I was in control. For years, the former Residents Association, the investors, and the politicians who tried to take me down had to bow to the reality. I owned that land, and there was nothing they could do to change that. The first few years were the most turbulent. Although they accepted the terms, they tried everything to reverse it, even intimidating me. I was sued countless times, and each case fell apart as soon as the judges saw the flaws in their arguments. The crisis in the real estate sector affected many, but the investors still had to pay me to continue operating. That's how I built my family's fortune. Over time, The money coming from those lands stopped being just a steady flow and transformed into a financial empire. I diversified my investments, bought land, companies, and launched my own ventures. We expanded into real estate, modern agriculture, technology, and even urban infrastructure. It didn't take long for, ironically, some of the companies that had once tried to crush me to now come asking for my funding for new projects. But what about those responsible for the scam? Where are they now? The old association no longer exists. The forgery scandal destroyed its reputation, and over time, the residents themselves turned against those who had tried to steal my land. They realized they had been deceived just as much as I had been. After all, the money raised from fees and sales never benefited anyone except the speculators and the corrupt people running things behind the scenes. The name of that association became a joke, an example of failure and rampant corruption. The investors, some accepted defeat and moved on with their lives, paying the land rent religiously. Others tried to leave the business, sell their ventures, but no one wanted to buy properties that depended on an eternal lease contract. Some went bankrupt, others just moved forward, resigned to the fact that no matter what they did, I would always be profiting at their expense. And Deborah? She was by far the one who resisted the most. Even after being exposed as the mastermind behind the fraudulent scheme, she refused to disappear. She tried to enter other businesses, attempted to return to the financial market, even tried to create her own real estate consulting firm, but no one trusted her. No serious investor wanted their name attached to a project with hers. The scam she tried to pull on me ruined her credibility forever. At first, she still tried to stay relevant. She showed up at industry events, tried to sell her image as a strong, influential executive. But the years went by, and less people wanted to listen to her. Her name became synonymous with fraud, corporate disaster. Eventually, Deborah disappeared from the spotlight. Today, I learned she lives a life very different from what she imagined for herself. She didn't go bankrupt completely, but she's nowhere near what she was before. She never had power over anything big again, was never feared again, and never commanded anything significant. The last news I heard about her was that she moved to a small town, trying to start over, far from the scandals. No matter where she is now, she knows she lost. And me, my life changed completely. I went from a farmer who almost lost everything to one of the largest investors in the region. My family now has a legacy that can never be erased. Everything we've built came from what they tried to steal from us, and I made sure that, in the end, we came out as the winners. Today, my family owns an empire. My children and grandchildren will never have to fight as I fought, but they will always remember where it all began. They grew up knowing that what we have today didn't come from luck or easy inheritance, but from a battle that took years to win. And the best part? I didn't need to destroy anyone. They destroyed themselves. Those who tried to take me down now have nothing, while I have everything that was mine by right and much more. That was my revenge, and I savor it every day.